At 1:08 in the morning on March 30th, 2026, two of the most sophisticated aircraft ever built crossed into Iranian airspace at 50,000 feet. Invisible to the naked eye, invisible to conventional radar, invisible the Iranians had every reason to believe to everything they possessed. They were wrong. 47 seconds. That's how long an Iranian S-300PMU2 Favorit battery held a radar lock on both B-2 Spirit stealth bombers at once. 47 seconds of a tombstone fire control radar painting two aircraft that cost over $2 billion each to build, representing decades of American stealth development. 47 seconds during which two 48 N6E2 surface-to-air missiles were armed, targeted, and launched from their transporter erector launchers, somewhere in the darkness northwest of Tabriz, and in the command centers of 8th Air Force, in the quiet war rooms where people track every signal, every emission, every electronic whisper crossing the electromagnetic spectrum over Iran, one question burned through every screen at once. How did an S-300 battery find them? What followed in the next 52 minutes would answer that question, and erase the battery that asked it. I'm your host at Defense Beacon, where we break down the most critical military operations shaping global power today. We're going inside the most complex air defense suppression mission the United States Air Force has executed in a generation. A mission that began with a radar lock nobody in the Pentagon thought was possible and ended with a flight of F-35As, turning the most capable air defense system Iran fields into burning wreckage on a hillside northwest of Tabriz. But to understand what happened in those 52 minutes, you need to understand what the B-2 Spirits were doing over Iran in the first place. March 2026. The strategic picture over the Middle East looked nothing like peacetime. The 12-day war of June 2025, which saw Israeli and American strikes hammer Iranian nuclear infrastructure across sites from Fordow to Natanz, had not ended the underlying conflict, it had deepened it. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Aerospace Force had spent the 9 months following Operation Midnight Hammer rebuilding, repositioning, and rethinking its air defense architecture with an urgency that came from genuine fear. The fear was justified, because the B-2s hadn't stopped flying. 8th Air Force out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri had maintained a rotating deployment of B-2 Spirits at forward staging locations since the summer of 2025. The specific operational details remain classified, but the broad parameters are understood. The bombers flew long-duration precision strike missions against Iranian military reconstitution efforts, targeting sites where Tehran was attempting to rebuild what American and Israeli strikes had dismantled: Revolutionary Guard weapons depots, ballistic missile production facilities, underground command nodes. On the night of March 30th, two B-2 Spirits, their identities still not publicly disclosed, were executing a coordinated bombing run targeting what 8th Air Force planners had assessed as a reconstituted weapons assembly facility on the southern outskirts of Tabriz, Iran's fourth largest city and a major industrial hub in the country's northwest. Tabriz matters here beyond simple geography. It sits at the center of Iranian Azerbaijan, a region with its own ethnic complexity and a long history as a military-industrial center. The facility the B-2s had been tasked to strike was embedded in an industrial zone on the city's southern edge, urban-adjacent positioning that Iranian planners had deliberately chosen to complicate American targeting. The aircraft had flown from their forward staging location, refueled from a KC-135 Stratotanker over eastern Turkey at cruising altitude, and were approaching their target corridor from the northwest. Standard ingress geometry. The route had been wargamed, modeled, and checked against every known Iranian air defense asset. The threat picture showed the nearest S-300 battery positioned 28 kilometers to the southeast of the planned flight path, well outside effective engagement range for that geometry. That assessment was based on data that was 72 hours old. The battery had moved. This is the detail that stayed with me when I went through the available after-action reporting. And it's the detail that makes this entire incident possible. The Iranian S-300PMU2 Favorit is not a static system. It was never meant to be. One of the core tactical doctrines that the Islamic Republic of Iran Air Defense Force developed after studying American suppression of enemy air defenses operations going back to Desert Storm's position deception, moving battery components to unpublished locations on unpredictable schedules, maintaining ghost positions at known sites while the actual systems sit elsewhere. The Americans knew this doctrine existed. They factored it into the targeting calculus. What they hadn't fully accounted for was how aggressively Iran had refined that doctrine in the 9 months since Midnight Hammer. The S-300PMU2 Favorit. Let's establish what this system actually is, because understanding the threat is the only way to understand why a 47-second radar lock was such a catastrophic event. The S-300PMU2 is the most advanced variant of the S-300 family exported from Russia. Iran received its first battery in 2016 after years of embargo and diplomatic dispute, and by 2026 operated a small number of batteries concentrated around its highest priority strategic sites. The system's core is the 30 N6E2 Tombstone Engagement Radar, a phased array fire control system capable of tracking up to 100 targets simultaneously and engaging 6 at the same time. The Tombstone's maximum detection range against conventional aircraft exceeds 300 kilometers. Against low observable targets, that range degrades significantly, but it does not go to zero. The 48N6E2 missile this battery fires is a semi-active radar homing surface-to-air missile with a range of up to 200 kilometers and a maximum intercept altitude of 27 kilometers. It carries a 180-kilogram proximity-fused warhead designed to detonate within lethal radius of its target. Against a conventional aircraft, an S-300 engagement is a death sentence. Against a B-2 Spirit, one of the most radar-absorbent shapes ever constructed, with a radar cross-section measured in fractions of a square meter, the engagement envelope shrinks dramatically. But it does not disappear. And on the night of March 30th, the Tombstone radar operator who picked up those two tracks at 1:08 in the morning knew exactly what he was looking at. Not because he could see them clearly. The B-2 signature at that range would have been a ghost, a shimmer, an anomaly a lesser operator might have dismissed as clutter. But this operator didn't dismiss it. He correlated it against known ingress geometry. He compared the track behavior against what a stealth aircraft on a bombing run would look like. Constant altitude, steady speed, straight course, no emissions of its own. He had been doing this for a long time. His crew later described a man who barely spoke during the engagement sequence, issuing commands in a quiet, flat voice and never once looking up from his display. A professional, the best his service had. He called the track. He illuminated, he launched. Two 48N6E2 missiles left their launch canisters at 1:09 in the morning, riding the Tombstone's radar beam outward into the dark sky above northwestern Iran. At that moment, 22,000 feet above the launch point and 34 kilometers to the northwest, the B-2's defensive management systems registered the illumination. The Defensive Management System, the DMS, is the B-2's integrated electronic warfare suite. It detects, classifies, and responds to radar threats with automation that allows reaction times measured in milliseconds. When the Tombstone radar locked on, the DMS immediately characterized the emission, frequency, pulse width, scan pattern, power level. It identified the system as an S-300 fire control radar within fractions of a second. It flagged the event as a launch-capable lock, and then it began computing the emergency egress vector. What happened in the next 40 seconds is described in the after-action summary as a controlled emergency. The word controlled is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The B-2s executed an aggressive egress maneuver that the DMS had calculated, a combined descent and electronic countermeasure employment sequence designed to break the Tombstone's track and defeat the incoming missile's semi-active guidance. The maneuver worked. Both missiles lost their guidance solution before reaching effective intercept geometry and self-destructed per their onboard logic at 1:09 and 41 seconds, but the egress cost them. According to the 8th Air Force after-action summary, each bomber expended emergency fuel reserves during the evasive maneuver that had not been planned for in the mission profile. The fuel state at egress completion was outside the parameters required to continue to the primary target. Secondary targets were similarly aborted. The aircraft were mission killed, not destroyed, not damaged, but rendered combat ineffective for that night's objectives. And somewhere on a hillside northwest of Tabriz, inside a radar van that was not supposed to exist at that location, an Iranian battery commander was probably letting himself feel a moment of satisfaction. He had found them. He had engaged them. He had driven them off. He had 52 minutes left. Put yourself in the position of the 8th Air Force mission commander who received the contact. Report at 1:10 in the morning. Two B-2s had just been illuminated and engaged by an S-300PMU2 at a grid coordinate that was not on any pre-mission threat map. The battery had executed a successful deception relocation, moving from its catalog position to an unpublished site the mission planners had not known about. The bombers were mission killed and returning to base. The targets they had been sent to strike remained intact. And somewhere out there, a Tombstone radar that should not exist at those coordinates was almost certainly shutting down, moving again, or transitioning to an emissions-controlled posture designed to prevent what everyone in that command center knew was coming next. Three things had to happen simultaneously. The EA-37B Compass Call orbiting over eastern Turkey had to burn the Tombstone's frequency-agile waveform, characterize it completely, build a jamming profile, and if possible keep the system engaged long enough to prevent it from relocating cleanly. The RQ-180 stealth ISR asset, already operating in the theater, had to be retasked to find where the battery actually was. Not where the contact report said it was, but where it would be when the F-35s arrived. And a flight of F-35As from Incirlik Air Base in Turkey had to be armed, briefed, and airborne with a strike package capable of destroying an S-300PMU2 battery that might be moving. All of this had to happen in under an hour. This wasn't a drill. The EA-37B Compass Call is worth understanding in detail because its role in what happened next was not secondary. It was foundational. The Compass Call is a heavily modified C-130 airframe operated by the 55th Electronic Combat Group, packed with signals intelligence and electronic warfare systems that represent decades of accumulated American expertise in the electromagnetic fight. Its primary mission is to disrupt, degrade, and deny enemy command and control communications. But its secondary capability, the one that mattered on the night of March 30th, is signals characterization. When the Tombstone radar illuminated the B-2s, it broadcast its operational signature across the electromagnetic spectrum. Compass Call, orbiting over eastern Turkey and monitoring the Iranian air defense network as part of its standing mission, captured that entire emission. Every frequency hop, every pulse interval, every variation in the radar's frequency-agile operating pattern. Here's what's most surprising about this case, and it's not the part most analysts focus on. The frequency-agile waveform the S-300PMU2 uses is theoretically designed to prevent exactly this kind of characterization. The system hops frequencies on a pattern that is supposed to be unpredictable. But unpredictable is a relative term when you're facing American signals intelligence systems that have been collecting against S-300 variants for 30 years. The Compass Call's library of S-300 frequency hopping patterns is extensive. The specific pattern the Tabriz battery used that night had enough characteristics in common with previously cataloged variants that the Compass Call crew was able to build a partial jamming profile within 11 minutes. Partial, not complete. Complete characterization would have taken longer than they had. What the partial profile gave them was enough to degrade, not eliminate, but degrade the Tombstone's ability to simultaneously track multiple targets while conducting a clean frequency hop. In practical terms, if the battery tried to illuminate another target while maintaining emissions control, the Compass Call could create enough interference to make that illumination unreliable. It was pressure, electronic pressure, designed not to destroy the system but to make the battery commander nervous. Nervous enough to either stay on the air too long or try to move when he shouldn't. He chose to move, and that was the mistake that ended his life. The RQ-180. Here is where we have to be careful about what can be said publicly and what cannot. The existence of the RQ-180 as a stealth unmanned ISR platform operated by the United States Air Force has been acknowledged in broad terms. Its specific capabilities remain classified. What the after-action reporting describes, without going into technical specifics, is that an RQ-180 asset was operating the theater on the night of March 30th and was retasked to support the battery location effort within minutes of the B-2 contact report. The challenge it faced was significant. The S-300PMU2 is designed to be relocated. The system's transporter erector launchers are wheeled vehicles. The radar van is a wheeled vehicle. The command post is a wheeled vehicle. An experienced Iranian crew can execute a displacement, shut down, break down, mount up, and drive in approximately 25 to 30 minutes. If the battery started moving at 110, when the contact report would have been filed, it could be 14 kilometers away from its engagement position by 1:35. This is exactly what happened. According to the declassified after-action summary, imagery and signals intelligence collected by the RQ-180 confirmed that the battery had begun displacing within approximately 4 minutes of the engagement. The crew was clearly following a pre-planned displacement protocol. They had a route, a destination, and a rehearsed procedure. This was not improvisation, it was a trained deception operation that had been planned, wargamed, and executed with discipline. The destination was a position 14 kilometers northwest of the engagement site, a shallow valley offering terrain, masking from several directions and close to road infrastructure that would allow rapid further displacement if needed. It was a good position. The battery commander had chosen well. He hadn't chosen well enough. What the after-action analysis described as particularly striking was the behavior of the battery crew during the displacement itself. Iranian communications intercepts, partially declassified in the summary, showed coordinated radio traffic between the battery's vehicles that were terse, professional, and adhered to a pre-scripted message format. No improvisation, no confusion. These were men who had rehearsed this movement many times. The command post vehicle led. The two transporter erector launchers followed in sequence on a route that avoided the most prominent ridgelines, minimizing their thermal silhouette against the sky. The radar van came last, towed by its prime mover, its antenna folded and locked. From a distance in the dark, the convoy looked like commercial heavy transport on a rural road. It wasn't. We spent considerable time going through the available open-source analysis of how American ISR systems locate moving ground targets, and one detail kept returning: the question of electronic emissions. An S-300PMU2 battery that is moving is still a battery generating noise, vehicle engines, communications between crew elements, navigation systems, data links between the command post and the launcher vehicles. A stealth ISR platform with the right sensor suite does not need to see a radar van emitting a fire control signal to track it. It needs to see enough electronic signature to distinguish a convoy of specific military vehicles moving on a specific road network from background traffic. The RQ-180 found the battery at 1:31 in the morning at its new position northwest of the original engagement site. One detail that stayed with me reading the after-action reporting is the specificity of what the ISR asset was able to confirm. Not just the presence of military vehicles at those coordinates, the presence of specific vehicle configurations consistent with an S-300PMU2 battery, the radar van, both transporter erector launchers, the command post vehicle, all present, all stationary. The crew apparently believed their deception protocol had worked. They believed they had slipped away clean. 3 officers in 8th Air Force know which specific deception protocol the battery used and exactly how the American ISR package broke it inside. An hour. They have not discussed it publicly. They probably never will. What we know is the result at 1:31. The RQ-180 confirmed the battery's position. At 1:33, that position was transmitted to the F-35 flight that had been airborne from Incirlik since 1:18. At 1:34, the flight lead updated his targeting solution. At 1:41, the strike was authorized by the appropriate command authority, the F-35A, 4 of them, armed with GBU-39B small-diameter bombs. The weapon selection here was deliberate and tells you something important about how mission was designed. The GBU-39B small-diameter bomb is a 250-pound class precision-guided munition with GPS-guided accuracy of less than 1 meter. Circular error probable under operational conditions. It has a range of over 110 kilometers when released from altitude, a standoff weapon, meaning the F-35s would not need to fly directly over the battery to deliver their weapons. Each F-35A in this configuration carried 8 GBU-39Bs on internal and external stations, 4 aircraft, 32 small-diameter bombs total, against a battery consisting of approximately 8 to 10 vehicles. The math was not favorable to the battery. Here's the take that will probably earn us some pushback, but it needs to be said. The Iranian deception protocol that moved this battery was genuinely sophisticated. This was not the product of an unsophisticated military. The Islamic Republic of Iran Air Defense Force learned specific lessons from watching American operations for decades and applied them with real discipline. The battery commander who found 2 B-2 spirits on his radar at 1:08 in the morning and had the skill and nerve to engage them. That represented real capability. What ultimately got that battery destroyed wasn't Iranian incompetence. It was the gap between a capable adversary and an American ISR and electronic warfare architecture built specifically to close exactly the gaps that capable adversaries try to exploit. The gap on the night of March 30th was 52 minutes wide. What this case tells us about the current state of air defense suppression is something defense analysts have been pointing at for years, but that rarely makes it into public discussion clearly. Stealth aircraft and suppression of enemy air defenses are not alternative approaches, they're complementary ones. The B-2s drew out the battery. The battery revealed itself by engaging. The electronic warfare and ISR architecture found it, tracked it, and fixed it. The F-35s destroyed it. Each element in that chain depended on the others. Remove anyone and the 52-minute solution doesn't exist. Here's the question I want to leave in the room for a moment, because I think it's the one that actually matters. If you're an Iranian air defense commander watching this operation unfold, what decision do you make differently? The battery commander who locked those B-2s was doing exactly what his doctrine told him to do. He found a target, he engaged, he relocated. He followed his protocol, and he still lost his battery and his life within an hour. So what's the lesson? Comment below. We read every response. The F-35A flight crossed into Iranian airspace at 1:49 in the morning at 40,000 feet. 4 aircraft in a tactical formation, flying on a carefully planned route that kept them outside the engagement envelopes of every other Iranian air defense asset whose position was known to 8th Air Force. They did not need to get close. They did not need to descend. They needed to fly to a release point and let 32 precision-guided munitions do the rest. The flight lead confirmed the target coordinates against the RQ-180's updated fix at 1:54, wind conditions, atmospheric data, final systems check. The kind of methodical, calm process that American fighter pilots execute with the same emotional register they'd use to file a maintenance report. No panic, just process. The ingress deserves a moment. 4 F-35s flying in combat spread over northwestern Iran, each pilot working through a checklist that had been rehearsed hundreds of times in simulation and dozens of times in live training. The cockpit of an F-35A on a strike mission is an information-dense environment. Sensor fusion displays that aggregate radar, infrared search and track, electronic warfare data, and targeting pod feeds into a single integrated picture. The pilot flying the strike mission doesn't manage sensors individually. He manages a synthesized battlefield picture. On this mission, that picture showed the valley position northwest of Tabriz, exactly where the RQ-180's fix said it would be. The battery vehicle stationary. No radar emissions, no indication of active air defense coverage in the immediate area. Everything looked exactly the way the pre-mission brief said it would. At 1:55 in the morning, all 4 F-35As released their first GBU-39B sticks. The geometry of a coordinated small-diameter bomb strike against a multi-vehicle target like an air defense battery is not simple. The goal is simultaneous impact, or as close to simultaneous as precision timing allows, across multiple dispersed aim points. The radar van, the 2 transporter erector launchers, and the command post vehicle were not parked in a neat line. They were dispersed across the valley position the battery commander had chosen, separated by distances designed to prevent a single large warhead from destroying the entire battery in one blast, standard survivability doctrine. The GBU-39B was specifically designed to feed that dispersal. Each bomb followed its own GPS-guided trajectory from the release point to its assigned aim point. 32 individual flight paths, computed in advance, updated continuously by GPS guidance, converging on a valley northwest of Tabriz from approximately 40,000 feet. Flight time from release to impact at that geometry, approximately 89 seconds. According to satellite imagery analyzed in the days following this strike, all primary aim points were destroyed. The 30N6E2 Tombstone radar van, the system that had found 2 B-2 spirits in the dark and held a lock on them for 47 seconds, ceased to exist at 1:56 in the morning. Both transporter erector launchers were confirmed destroyed. The command post vehicle was destroyed. The battery commander, whose identity has not been publicly disclosed by American authorities, was killed at his post. There is a human dimension to that sentence that the after-action language deliberately flattens. The commander who died in that valley was, by every available measure, one of the most capable air defense officers his country had produced. He had trained for years on a system that his government had fought diplomatically and financially for over a decade to acquire. He had developed a deception protocol sophisticated enough to position his battery against the most advanced stealth bombers on Earth. He had achieved a radar lock that his American counterparts had not believed possible, and he was killed 89 seconds after 4 aircraft he never detected released weapons he never saw coming. That is what American standoff strike capability means in practice, not an abstraction. A person at his post at 1:56 in the morning, with no warning. The one complication the after-action summary acknowledged directly was a timing issue in the second stick release sequence. One of the 4 F-35s experienced a brief fire control system latency that delayed its GBU-39B release by approximately 3 seconds relative to the planned sequence. This meant 2 of its assigned aim points received impact slightly after the main salvo rather than simultaneously with it. The practical effect on the mission outcome was 0. Both aim points were destroyed regardless. But the deviation from the planned timing was logged, analyzed, and factored into subsequent mission planning. 3 seconds. That's the complication that gets flagged in this after-action report. Not a catastrophic failure, not a near miss. A 3-second timing deviation on a secondary release sequence. The fact that this is the significant complication in the write-up tells you something about how the rest of the mission went. The B-2s had been forced off their primary target. That reality sat at the center of every after-action discussion at 8th Air Force in the days following March 30th. The mission had succeeded in its secondary objective. The S-300 battery that had found the bombers was destroyed, its capability eliminated, its position deception protocol now at least partially understood by American ISR. But the weapons assembly facility south of Tabriz that the B-2s had been tasked to strike remained intact that night. It was struck 4 nights later by a different aircraft package using a different approach geometry. The Iranian deception protocol used to relocate the Tabriz battery, the specific methodology that had moved the system 14 kilometers to a position that was not in any American targeting database, was analyzed in detail by the 3 8th Air Force officers whose names appear in the classified section of the after-action report. The protocol involved a combination of false emissions from dummy positions, coordinated radio traffic designed to suggest the battery remained at its known location, and a displacement route that used civilian road infrastructure during a window when Iranian authorities had imposed local traffic restrictions that would have cleared the roads of background vehicle signatures. It was sophisticated. It had worked well enough to get the battery into an engagement position against 2 B-2 spirits, an outcome the architects of the protocol had almost certainly considered a triumph before the night was over. What the protocol hadn't accounted for was the persistence of American ISR coverage. The assumption embedded in the Iranian deception plan was that once the battery had relocated and gone emissions controlled, it would be effectively invisible to American sensors for long enough to escape the retaliation window. That assumption rested on a model of American ISR capability that was by March 2026 significantly outdated. Most analysts looking at Iranian air defense doctrine assume their biggest vulnerability is radar performance against stealth aircraft. But the evidence from March 30th suggests the real vulnerability runs deeper than that. The relocation protocol itself was the vulnerability. Not because it didn't work. It did work, the battery moved successfully, but because the American ISR architecture was watching the relocation in real time with tools the Iranian planners hadn't fully factored into their threat model. Cold War tactics, updated and refined, still don't close a 52-minute window when the adversary's ISR can see you moving. The strike had destroyed the battery. But the after-action analysis surfaced a question that 8th Air Force Command was taking very seriously. If this battery had found 2 B-2s, how confident was anyone that no other S-300 battery had already displaced to an unknown position on a similar protocol? The answer to that question drove the next 72 hours of ISR tasking over northwestern Iran. The Compass Call shifted its orbit slightly eastward, prioritizing coverage of the corridor where the destroyed battery had operated. Analysts at 8th Air Force pulled every ISR product from the preceding 2 weeks and ran it against the displacement signature the Tabriz battery had produced, looking for similar patterns, similar timing, similar road network usage. 14 separate vehicle movements were flagged for further analysis. 11 were cleared within 24 hours. 3 required additional collection. None produced a confirmed second displaced battery, but the process itself revealed something important. The Iranian Air Defense Force had been rehearsing displacement protocols with a frequency that pre-Midnight Hammer ISR cadence had not fully captured. The deception operation at Tabriz had not been a one-off. It had been one execution of a doctrine being practiced, refined, and distributed across multiple battery crews. That finding changed how 8th Air Force structured its ISR coverage priorities over the following weeks. Here's the part that doesn't sit right when you look at it carefully. The 47-second lock was simultaneously Iran's greatest tactical success and its greatest strategic failure. The battery found the bombers. The engagement was technically valid. 2 missiles launched, the aircraft forced off their targets. By any narrow measure of air defense performance, the battery commander accomplished his mission. And that success is exactly what got his battery destroyed. If he had detected the B-2s but chosen not to engage, if he had stayed emissions controlled and simply reported the detection, the battery would still be alive. The F-35 strike that destroyed him was authorized because he illuminated and engaged. His success was the signal that gave away his position. This is the paradox that Iranian air defense commanders live with now. Engaging American stealth aircraft means revealing your radar's location and signature to an electronic warfare architecture that will use that information to destroy you. Not engaging means failing your mission. There is no clean answer in that decision space. The strategic implications of the March 30th operation took shape in the days that followed. Iranian state media did not initially acknowledge the destruction of the battery, which is itself a form of confirmation in the information environment surrounding these operations. The first oblique acknowledgement came from Revolutionary Guard-affiliated media 4 days after the strike, framing the event in terms carefully designed to minimize its significance without denying it outright. Within 8th Air Force, the operation was assessed as a successful suppression of enemy air defense's mission that had surfaced important intelligence about Iranian position. Deception protocols validated the effectiveness of the EA-37B Compass Call in a real-world S-300 engagement scenario and demonstrated the F-35A standoff strike capability against a dispersed mobile air defense system. The forced egress of the B-2s and the abort of their primary mission was logged as a significant operational setback that was partially offset by the intelligence value of the engagement and fully offset from a targeting standpoint by the follow-on strike 4 nights later. The battle damage assessment confirmed. Both tells destroyed. Command post destroyed. The 48 N6E2 missiles that had been fired at the B-2s, both gone, self-destructed when their guidance failed. The battery was not a degraded capability. It was an eliminated one. Satellite imagery taken 36 hours after the strike showed the valley position. Northwest of Tabriz is a scattering of burned wreckage across the hillside. The thermal signatures from the destroyed vehicles were still visible in infrared imagery a full day after the strike. The precision of the GBU-39B impacts was such that road infrastructure immediately adjacent to the battery position was undamaged. The bombs struck their assigned military aim points with the accuracy the specifications promised, 1 meter. That's the circular error probable of the GBU-39B under operational conditions against vehicles at night from 40,000 feet over Iran. There's one element of the ISR methodology the RQ-180 used to locate the relocated battery that we couldn't verify through available sources, and it's probably the most technically interesting piece of the whole operation. If you followed coverage of American Signal's intelligence capabilities against mobile targets and you think you know what it was, drop a comment. We read everything. The broader context matters here. The March 30th operation was not an isolated event. It was one engagement in a sustained American air campaign over Iran that had been running since the summer of 2025. The B-2 missions, the EA-37B support packages, the RQ-180 ISR coverage, these were not assembled for this specific strike. They were elements of a persistent theater architecture that had been in place for months, conducting continuous operations, continuously refining its understanding of Iranian air defense behavior. What the Tabriz battery had done, executing a sophisticated position deception protocol, finding and engaging B-2 spirits, forcing them off their targets, was genuinely remarkable. It represented the best that Iran's air defense force could do with the best system it possessed, and the American response had still found the battery, fixed it, and destroyed it inside an hour. That's the number that defines this engagement more than any other. Not 47 seconds, the duration of the radar lock. Not 52 minutes, the time from contact report to strike authorization. The defining number is how many S-300PMU2 batteries Iran can field against ongoing American operations, and how many of those operations the American ISR and electronic warfare architecture can support simultaneously. The answer to the second question, more than Iran has batteries. The EA-37B Compass Call that characterized the Tombstone's frequency-agile waveform on the night of March 30th returned to its orbit over eastern Turkey after the engagement and continued its mission. It did not need to return to base for resupply or reconfiguration. It did not expend a weapon. Its availability for the next Iranian radar emission was immediate. The RQ-180 that located the battery continued its ISR mission over northwestern Iran after the strike, providing battle damage assessment and continuing to monitor for further air defense activity in the area. The F-35s returned to Incirlik, rearmed, and were available for tasking again within hours. The S-300PMU2 battery was gone permanently. Iran's air defense commanders had watched one of their most capable systems, a battery that had achieved something no Iranian radar operator had previously accomplished, a confirmed radar lock on 2 B-2 Spirit's stealth bombers during a live combat operation, get located and destroyed within 52 minutes of that achievement. The message was not subtle, and it was not intended to be. What do you think? Did the battery commander's decision to engage change anything strategically for Iran? Or was the outcome inevitable the moment American ISR established coverage over that theater? There's a real argument in both directions, and it gets at something fundamental about whether sophisticated deception protocols can create durable sanctuary against this kind of persistent ISR presence. That's the weapons assembly facility south of Tabriz that the B-2s had been forced to abort on. Night of March 30th was struck on the night of April 3rd, 2026. A different approach geometry, a different aircraft package, the same result. The 3 8th Air Force officers who know exactly how American ISR broke Iran's position deception protocol inside an hour are not talking. They are planning. Because the Tabriz battery was one system, Iran fields others. And the same EA-37B that characterized the Tombstone waveform on March 30th was back in its orbit over eastern Turkey the following night. The Compass Call never stops listening. The balance of power over northwestern Iran did not shift on the night of March 30th. It had already shifted. The events of that night simply made it visible in a way that no one in Tehran could ignore. An S-300PMU2 Favorit battery, the best air defense system Iran operates, executing a sophisticated deception protocol developed specifically to counter American targeting, had managed to illuminate 2 B-2 Spirits and force them off their targets, a genuine tactical success. and it had still been destroyed inside an hour. Cold War air defense doctrine, updated and refined, does not change the fundamental arithmetic of American electronic warfare and ISR persistence. The Tombstone radar saw 2 B-2 Spirits for 47 seconds. American systems were watching that Tombstone radar the entire time. The difference between 47 seconds and 52 minutes is the difference between a radar lock and a burned hillside. If this breakdown of how American air power actually works in a contested environment is the kind of analysis you want more of, subscribe to Defense Beacon. This is what we do. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next operation breakdown. And if you want to see the full picture of what happened over Iran in the spring of 2026, there's a video coming on the April 3rd follow-on strike that goes into the targeting methodology in detail. That one will answer some questions. This video deliberately left open. Comment lock if you think the Iranian battery commander made the right call engaging those B-2s. The argument for it is more compelling than most people realize. The Compass Call is still orbiting. The RQ-180 is still watching. The F-35s are still armed. And somewhere in northwestern Iran, an air defense commander is looking at a radar scope and doing math he doesn't like. The answer to